guys. Thank you so much for joining us on this very wintry day today. We've got snow outside. Leeds is completely in white today, which is a rarity up here. Well, it has been a rarity for the past couple of years. We haven't had a white Christmas or a white winter.
Still wasn't a white Christmas, was it?
Yeah. So today we have Sudha Bhuchar on Ask the Artist. And as you all may already know, and if you don't, if you're joining us for the first time, Ask the Artist is the strand where we are looking at artists who have been in the game for many, many years, and there's many things that we can learn from them and all the experiences that they've had. And it'd be great to find out more about Sudha, who was the co-artist director of Tamasha Theatre and is now doing many, many other things. So Sudha, thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us today. How is the weather like where you are at the moment?
Well, it's not snowing. It's cold. Yeah, it's cold.
Well, let's go straight into it. You've had quite a few milestone moments in your career, but let's start right at the beginning. How did you get into the arts?
I mean, totally by accident, really. So I was a teenager in London with my sister, and we went to see these kind of community entertainment at a Diwali function, and Tara Arts were performing. So Jatinder Verma was on stage with his sort of colleagues, and they were doing like these sketches of being young and Asian. We found them really funny, but it was also just a kind of eureka moment of, wow, there are people like us, you know, and they think like us, and they're questioning their parents, and they're questioning religion, and, you know, just being very subversive and funny.
Just give me a little bit of how, because I've always, obviously I'm still quite old, I guess, but I'm not a 70s baby, so I don't remember the times when all this stuff was going on. And
okay, so this was like 1978. I think, yeah, around 77, 78.
Yeah, and like what was the novelty of going to there's a novelty of going to the theatre and seeing an Indian show?
Well, we weren't actually at the theatre. We were at like a community, you know, religious Diwali function, like the Hindu society. So all the theatre didn't happen in theatres necessarily. So yeah, it was a novelty because, you know, our entertainment at that time mostly used to be going to see Bollywood films in a double bill on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the cinemas would put them on and you had to take your own tea and, you know.
It was
all the English films were not on, you know. So it was a novelty. And then Jatinder and his colleagues, they kind of invited us to talk to them. And I was very shy. I didn't really speak to anyone. But my sister was an extrovert, and they invited us to go along. And she started acting first. Right. And then I kind of literally, Jatinder told me one day that the actress who was supposed to play a policewoman in a show of his didn't turn up, or, you know, pulled out for some reason. And he's like, "You're right, here's a book, you know, you have to go on and ask the questions." Yeah. And that's how I started, really.
So your first role was a correct policewoman?
Yeah, I had like a couple of lines as a policewoman. I've never played a policewoman since, actually.
Oh gosh, no. Well, it's a. I suppose it's a different role to have, isn't it? It's a good thing that you wasn't
doctors.
Yeah, it's a good thing you wasn't a doctor or a shopkeeper.
Do you know? I still haven't played a doctor, so I've to wear a uniform.
That's interesting. Well, if any casting directors from Holby City or doctors are watching, I think they should get in touch with you, because I know.
Well, I wish they would, because I've played a lot of distraught mothers. So that would be a nice change. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So tell us about that transition. So you obviously started off acting, and I'm assuming it was the first inroad into the arts for you, and then you slowly transitioned into sort of.
Well, I think you see, Tara Arts, they used to meet like in the week. You know, initially it was just Wednesday nights, and then it became Wednesday, Thursday, and then Tara transitioned from a community company into a professional company.
Yeah.
At the same time, I was doing my A-level. So at one point, Tara had a professional wing as well as a community wing, and then people transitioned from the two. And I did a degree in maths and sociology, but I was spending more and more time at Tara in the evenings. And I was there at the time, you know, Shaheen Khan, she and I are contemporaries. So we both kind of decided after we finished our degree that we were going to go into acting. Although I never sort of said it to myself, I just kind of, it happened by accident, you know.
And was it the same thing with your writing as well? So they're like, you got into acting accidentally. How do you make that?
I got into acting first, and then as you know, we were doing. I was going on tour with Tara. It had become a professional company by then. I also, like Shaheen, we sort of decided that actually, if you want a career, you can't just be a Tara. You have to audition for, TV, etc.
Yeah.
And then I used to find that the auditions I went up for, they were so dull and nothing, So you go up for
things don't change, exactly, yeah.
You go up for a nurse or something. And I remember being asked, literally, does that thing in your nose come out?
Oh.
And, can you put your hair up? And there was like a few lines. So both Shaheen and I actually decided that, us and our friends were far more interesting than the parts we were going up for.
Yeah.
So we started writing together, and, we wrote this series called Girlies, which was on Radio 4. And at the same time, Christine London Smith was a producer at Radio 4. So that was one of the first few things we started writing. But, parallel to that, I had set up Tamasha with Christine as well. So, of course, Christine came to Tara as an actor.
Oh, right. So did you know Christine from before, in the Tara days, not in
those early days, not when I was at school and going to Tara initially, but when Tara became a professional company, we did this play called The Broken Thigh, which is an episode from the Mahabharata, where, Jatinder was looking at how the question of morality and, in fact, the baddies, so I played Duryodhana, who's, he's the sort of villain and male.
Yeah.
So we all, us women, we played these male parts. And
so you were breaking
boundaries
in the 70s, because that's such a bit of a vogue now, isn't it, to flip over the genders?
Yes, but we did it many years ago. Yeah.
Great.
So we played these kind of warriors from the Mahabharata, and that's how I met Christine. So then, Chris and I set up Tamasha at the same time as, all these things. I was starting to go into TV, etc. I got a job as a presenter of Network East.
Network East, I remember that. Wow. Was that on? Was it a Channel 4 thing?
No, it was BBC.
Oh, right. Okay.
I think you're thinking of
Eastern Eye. No,
there was something.
There was something else on Channel 4 that used to come on.
Yeah, Eastern Eye was on Channel 4.
Yeah. Network East.
Even before that was that Nay Zindagi, Naya Jeevan.
Yeah, was it? Yeah, my dad goes on about that. Was before my time, but I remember Network East. It used to have a really elaborate logo, didn't it? It looked like a rangoli, I think.
I don't know.
We'll have to find that one out. So I mean, it's very similar really to the path that we've taken, which is going into writing, because I think as an artist, you start realizing that that's where the power lies in terms of taking control of your stories. Is that the same thing that you kind of realized, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time, certain opportunities came together, and it worked, and you didn't realize that it was such a special thing. Until it disappears in a way, but Girlies was very, very special. We actually had 3 series, and, the premise of that was, at the time there was a series on TV called 30 something. So this was the sort of Radio Brown 30 something, it was about 5 friends who were in their 30s, Asian women, but none of them were married to Asian men.
Interesting.
So it was this sort of multicultural slice of middle-class life, comedy, but very ahead of its time, actually. And, at the time we tried to make it into a TV series, but,
Did Girlies have anything to do with Carol Church's Top Girls? Was there? No. I don't know why, but I just see
other than sort of all being around at the similar time, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say what are you most proud of in terms of, let's start from maybe the acting and also from the writing, from all the stuff that you've done? What would you say that you really is a highlight for you personally?
I mean, there's so many highlights. I think so. Certainly my play Child of the Divide, which I wrote in 2006. We've jumped decades in the story, but that was about. It was inspired by a short story by Bisham Sahani about a lost child, a Hindu boy who gets separated from his parents, and then he's taken in by a Muslim family. But it sort of became the story of 5 children in 1947 partition. And that's sort of been it's the play that keeps giving and giving.
Yeah.
So, I did it in 2006, then it was Time Out's best show of the year for families. And then it went to America the following year with a company called Web Play. And then in 2017, I was able to remount it to mark the 70th anniversary of partition, and it was as resonant. We were invited to Canada in 2018, so that was certainly been very special. But there's a lot of stuff, and recent work as well.
What is the standout performance for you personally that you did as an actor?
I don't think there really is one performance, to be honest. I mean, I've enjoyed lots of, I've enjoyed playing the central role in Rohinton Misty's A Fine Balance, which we adapted, Christine and myself. And again, it was a sort of huge book on stage at Hampstead Theatre, and it was remounted. And in fact, last year, company in New Zealand, Prayas company, did it in New Zealand, so that's been a role. And then last year, what I've really enjoyed is kind of coming back into film in my 50s. So I got to play Riz Ahmed's mum in Mughal Mowgli.
Oh, really? Yeah, we haven't seen that, actually. Yeah. And he's made an announcement, actually, just this week that he's got married.
I hear, yes.
Yeah, to a beautiful writer in California. He's revealed the identity now. But yeah, we were just talking about that yesterday, weren't we?
But I've really enjoyed, I've very much enjoyed the work I've done last year in lockdown. So, it's a kind of a platform of work called Touchstone Tales. And actually it was exploring the theme of touch. So they had this big scientific survey commissioned by Wellcome Collection and Radio 4. And alongside that, it was like an artist's response to explore that theme of touch with the communities in Luton. So I ended up writing these 7 stories, 6 monologues and a duologue. And those have been really, really special. I performed 2 of them. So they're like these towering characters that I've written. And, you don't get to do that unless you take control of it. But, it's, I think I would really love people to watch those because they're still on Zoom. They've now become audio podcasts and they've been published.
Yeah. Don't worry, we will plug them for you.
Sorry?
I said we will plug them for you, don't worry.
Oh, please do. Yeah. But, in terms of performances,
Yeah. So I'm really interested in this this transition that you had from actor to playwright. I guess, if you could give us a sense of when you made that change, and I'm assuming that it wasn't as black and white as that.
It's not as black and white as that because it literally started from, oh God, I'm going up for parts where they're saying, does that thing in your nose come out? So you want to write for yourself. So it started very selfishly from Shaheen and I going, right, we're going to write ourselves big fat parts and parts for other people like us, and that was on radio with girlies. And with Tamasha, with Christine and me, it was like, we didn't set up to, we're going to have this theatre company that is going to be huge and last for years and years. It was much more like this project inspires us. And then that project led to the next project. So I was writing and acting at the same time. And then what transition did occur is that I don't now feel I have to write for myself.
Yeah.
So I am separate, Sudha the writer. Yes, in Touchstone Tales, I ended up playing 2 of the parts because they were very much I wanted to. But I no longer, for instance, I adapted Lorca's The House of Banana Alba into a Pakistani setting. And I didn't want to be in it, even though it was an all-female cast. I very much wanted to be the writer and sit outside.
And just go on, you finish off what you were saying.
Yeah, so I sort of feel like I think the 2 are part of the 2 sides of the same coin, really.
Yeah, and what about the struggles in terms of like when you became an actor, when you became a writer? Sorry, what kind of struggles that were different maybe as a writer that you had within the industry in terms of some of the power politics, for instance, or were you a writer for a period before you had set up Tamasha? In which case, were you the kind of friction that you may have come across to try?
I think those struggles are sort of really mirrored now with the struggles that I find young writers of colour still have, and I now work as a dramaturg as well, where I support a lot of people who often it's their first plays and they are to do with like you feel as though you can't bring your full self into something. So when I write, I use languages, a bit of Punjabi, Urdu, or I'm exploring a hybridity of English, where if our character would speak in Punjabi, what would that English sound like, And And I think a lot of the time we've had struggles where you've had certainly critics, so you'll be like, for instance, I co-wrote a piece called Strictly Dandiya, which is about the Gujarati community in North London. And you have a house full of Gujaratis mixed with theatre goers, absolutely loving it. And then you'll have Charlie Spencer sitting in the front row with a long face and a shit review in the Telegraph. And that was the pattern. We did a verbatim piece called The Trouble with Asian Men. And again, Charlie Spencer, sorry, I am naming him. I never did. And his review started with, the trouble with Asian men is that many of them are trying to kill us. But, murderous Islam doesn't feature in Tamasha's piece. So those kind of things, my God, they were like, what do you have to do,
Yeah.
Because actually at the time, if you got a bad review by a white critic in a mainstream papers, it could kill half your audience.
Yes. Yeah.
I think
half the audience was
less.
probably white, maybe.
Sorry?
At that time. Was half the audience white at that time for those?
Well, it wasn't that they were, but if they were interested in coming, that reading those reviews would make them not come. So something like my Lorca piece, which people would have come, and this time I don't think I can blame Charlie Spencer, but it was that thing of, who are you to do Lorca? I had to go on Radio 4 and dare I name, Jenny Murray. They were like, oh, it was incomprehensible because of the language.
Wow.
And actually, honestly, if you leaned in and listened, all it was a few servants cussing in Punjabi. And if you just allowed it,
It would have
Whereas
been.
I think now probably people are owning that space and saying, which is what we were doing, but there was so much.
There's too many barriers.
Obstacles and barriers. And you didn't call it out so much,
Yeah. Well, we did a show.
On the back foot.
We did a show in 2016 with a very similar. It's the only show that we've done where we've actually interspersed, Hindi and Punjabi into English, and that was very well received. I mean, obviously the times have probably changed, and it was very. There was we did a Q&A after the show, and we specifically asked whether that actually was a hindrance. In fact, we had a whole song that we commissioned, a beautiful song by Niraj Jag, who the whole song was in Hindi. It was basically like a Bollywood song.
Yeah. It's not. It was always. I think the audiences were always open. It's the gatekeepers and the people writing. So actually, Shobana Jayasingh, the wonderful dancer who's got her own company, Bharatnatyam, you should definitely feature her. She talked about very eloquently about the disparity of discourse. So what the audiences feel is very different to how it gets written about,
Yeah.
And in fact, Christine and I as Tamasha, we actually commissioned like all these reports that the Arts Council has, like I often feel as though we are hearing something on a loop, because we commissioned a report. We actually, what's the word? Like we looked at all our reviews and how we were being talked about and invited a conversation about this with other artists and people. And it was at the National, but the reception was hostile from critics.
Yeah. And what was that report called? Do you remember?
It's called In Conversation. Mm-hmm. And it will be on the file somewhere in the Arts Council's archives or Tamasha.
Catching dust somewhere.
Yeah, catching dust somewhere, not being learned from. I think this is. I mean, we've done quite a few of these interviews now, and I think it becomes very apparent. Some of these testimonies really are very much aligned with very similar experiences, and they're undeniable, I think. And they're still being felt today by emerging artists and younger artists now. I mean, in terms of the lack of people of colour critics, I think that's obviously important, which is one of the things that Offstage is wanting to do. But I think when we started off Offstage, it was endemic, wasn't it? That why doesn't a platform like this exist, and why isn't it sustained? Because they have existed for pockets in times, but not something that's lasted. And I think that's a problem, really.
Yeah, but I think this is the thing about everything in our world, where there is a sort of, you make huge headways but people are obsessed with the new, and I think it's really important that as intergenerational artists, that we have dialogues that are built on, what's come before, So when you look at those films that we've seen on TV, is it Steve McQueen's films?
Yeah.
What were they called now?
Small Axe.
Small Axe. You know, what a brilliant tribute to moments of history, so important, captured culturally like that, you know. And I think we've had a lot of that in the theatre or in film, even, you know. Mahmood Jamal, the wonderful poet who died recently, you know, all his work with his brother, Ahmed Jamal, you know, there are films and archives of stuff that need to be all joined up and connected to sort of to show what sort of work that we all collectively have, what presence we've already had, you know?
Yeah.
Even like magazines, funnily enough, I came across, there was a magazine called Bazaar, you know, I've got a copy of it somewhere.
I do, that name rings a bell. It rings a bell, yeah.
Right, which was an art, you know, Asian arts magazine, beautiful.
And talking about sort of Asian arts, I mean, one of the things that we've increasingly got, we're starting to really unpack, and I think we probably will be unpacking in this issue, is you have obviously Black representation, which is very much talked about within the arts. When it comes to diversity, that's the first sort of point of call, that's the sort of moniker that people use within the Arts Council and other practitioners. And there is a section of, that Black unity still existing that used to exist in the 70s and 80s, where actually a lot of South Asian artists are quite happy with that moniker. And there has obviously been, due to politics, a drift in terms of how those communities are represented on stage. Do you think that there is a disparity between there's a lack now of that artistic unity, and that there is a clear disparity between what is considered Black art and what is South Asian art, and whether South Asian art gets as much recognition as Black art?
I mean, you know, these are all sort of broad sweeping things, but certainly, you know, it is obviously and rightly, you know, with the whole Black Lives Matter movement and what's happened, there is a compelling need to address inequality, but it should embrace anti-racism and inequality of everybody that is, you know, marginalized. And I think we've got a long way to go, certainly, you know, but it shouldn't be their preferred minorities of choice. It should be a more joined up conversation. And I think, again, you know, I know you've covered it. I think the whole thing of us, you know, the definition of political Black.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly we grew up in that era where we did define ourselves like that. And, you know, it was a political statement. But, you know, everything is getting readdressed and refined. But I certainly don't feel that as an Asian actor of my age that, you know, things have improved hugely. And I always find myself coming back to or feels like square one. Obviously it isn't, but you know, you do all this significant stuff and then you come back and you go, like I started this year with a kind of, okay, so 2021, like what, and then what now, you know, but there you go. You know.
So you set up Tamasha in 1989. And what did you hope that company, your vision of that company would achieve compared to the other theatre companies that were around at the time? I'm assuming it was only Tara Arts actually that was there, that was serving the Asian community.
Tara Arts, and I mean, Kali was around the similar time, I think, as well. I mean, Rivco came much later.
Yeah.
But I mean, as I said before, you know, for me, Tamasha came out of friendship. You know, Christine and I, it was our friendship. And we started with, and in fact, again, joined up with Tara because Jatinder gave us our first opportunity, you know, at the center, which is now this beautiful gem of a new theatre. You know, he said, Christine had gone to India and she was supposed to be teaching Chekhov in the National School of Drama in Delhi. But she ended up reading Mulkraj Anand's book, which is called Untouchable. And it's about the day in the life of a sweeper boy in the 1930s. So she did that in India beautifully outside as a promenade piece. And when I saw the video, when she came back, we both kind of said, oh, there's nothing like this here. Let's do it, you know. So we actually just set up Tamasha to do that one project. And then one project led to the next. But we never sat and said, oh, this is our vision for this company. This is how it's going to be different. You know, all of that came much later. One project led to the next. I think a real turning point, I guess, was East is East, you know, that just became this sort of phenomenal hit from the moment it started. And that's when, you know, even then, I think, I mean, or slightly before, the Arts Council actually invited us to think about ourselves as more than project to project. But at that point, we were very much attached to our individual careers as well, you know.
Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting that you mentioned that, because actually another topic that we will be covering hopefully in this issue is exactly that. Where are all the contemporary new Black and Asian theatre companies now? There hasn't been one for a while. I think Tribe Arts is probably the newest one in that tranche. But
I think young artists now, especially people who get some visibility quickly, you know, they are much more interested in forging their own stuff.
Freelance, yeah.
But they are setting up companies, you know, in order to do that, you know, or they are being self-producers, attaching themselves. So, for instance, I mentored Nyla Levy, you know, whose play Does My Bomb Look Big in This? And I was the dramaturg. But, you know, she made her own awards to the Arts Council and then collaborated with Tamasha. So I think, you know, companies can act as an umbrella for other artists to kind of produce their work. But then, you know, Nyla has been recognized and picked up, and she's, you know, hopefully forging things in TV. People don't necessarily want to do what we did. You know, it was quite tough. And
I think
maybe there are more opportunities now, you know.
But I think what's interesting is the conversation the Arts Council were having back then. Obviously, if they were encouraging you to think more than just project by project, which actually is the reverse now that we found. I think the Arts Council now really heavily encourage individual practice through developing your creative practice funding pots, for instance, and the way that with our experience has been in terms of setting up the company. Very much kind of really not allowing for you know, collectives to join up their thinking and have longer term thinking. So that's quite a different mindset.
I mean, I think it is. Yeah, it's having a sort of critical power base with a mass of people. You know, I mean, I do worry that we're fragmented. You know, and yes, you have this visibilities, you know, of individual projects or people, but actually, you know, how is our cohort of artists going to be having a big Netflix series, or, you know, about British Asians? Because then when you have things that are on TV set in India, you know, you don't get a look in anyway in terms of as cast. So it is tough, you know.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Netflix. I mean, you've worked as an actress on TV and film. What's the difference that you found working as a British Asian actress in TV and film compared to theatre?
I mean, I think, you know, I'm a jobbing actor now and writer. So it's sort of, you get individual opportunities, but they don't necessarily lead to the next thing. But also I am finding that people my age, you know, when there are big parts, central parts, you know, they'll audition you and you waste your time doing these self-tapes, you know, which we call self-harm tapes. Then,
that's a really.
But I've got one to do this. I've got to do one this weekend. You know?
Oh, really?
They always come on a Friday.
Yeah.
Always come on a Friday, and there's a deadline for 10 o'clock on Monday.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we don't have anything to do at the weekends, do we?
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is they end up being cast with people from Bollywood. You know, and it's almost as though that was the agenda anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm just now finding it like, okay, how are we supposed to progress? Because even when it's a British Asian mother, it's usually goes to, you know, someone from Bollywood.
Yeah. No names mentioned. I know exactly the kind of actresses that you're thinking about there, even though they're very good actresses.
People that I absolutely admire, grew up, you know, looking at and wishing, you know, feeling they're fantastic actors. That's not the issue. The issue is that the stories, I think diversity in this country doesn't see British age. I don't know, there's all this talk of authenticity now, and, you know, as if we're less authentic somehow.
Well, that is a very interesting point. I mean, I'd just like to unpack that a little bit more, because last year we were going to set up, and we hopefully will be, is British Asian History Month. Because I think there was a similar movement that was set up last year called the South Asian Heritage Month, which was, I suppose, a response to Black History Month. But a lot of the history that we talk about, when we talk about South Asian representation, even now in plays,
and films and TV, there's a harking back to the motherland, to the first generational stories, the migrational stories, which obviously are very relevant and have contributed to our history. But we are now 3 or 4 generations deep in this country, and there is a lot of contribution and a lot of history within British Asians themselves. Do you think there's any importance in, or do you think there's been any movement in reclaim or claiming that identity and really trying to represent that and not always harking back to the motherland?
Yeah, I mean, I think harking back sounds quite negative, but actually, for instance, the partition is something, like my play resonated way beyond the time that it was set, because it allows you to look at what's happening now, the fragmented world that we're in, the divides, and actually allows you to look at it through the lens of something that happened 70 years ago, 75 years ago nearly. And also, in a sense, the kind of wound of those experiences are still very fresh, So I think there's an importance in keeping that kind of history there, because every generation is going to experience it for the first time. Like when my kids were at primary school, even they didn't know that India and Pakistan were different countries. So when you give history back to kids, it gives them a context. But of course, as the decades go, we're also making history. We make history in this country, So those things are very important. That whole East African diaspora that I come from, everything needs to build. It isn't one or the other,
Yeah.
Part of the same stories,
Yeah, definitely. So you set up Bhuchar Boulevard then in 2015. You left Tamasha, which would be interesting to know why. But how different do you think, from the times obviously have moved on now from when you set up Tamasha and Bhuchar Boulevard. What were your aims for this company as an artist, as an artistic director, as obviously all these other roles that you've done in the interim? What was the vision for that company, for this company that you are currently in, and where do you think British Asian theatre is heading into the future?
There's a lot of questions in there. The thing is, Bhuchar Boulevard's a very personal thing for me. And again, it's things that just come out of accident. I think it was 2011, 2012. I was in Houston, attending a family wedding of my cousin's daughter. And he had a sort of marquee outside, and, he's a very successful doctor, and he had a little swimming pool. And by the side, he'd put up the shamiana for the wedding. And as we were going in, I saw a street sign on, inviting people in, which said Bhuchar Boulevard.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so, he's got, he's a butcher as well. And we, as a family, it's quite an unusual surname. So there are not many of us, So I said to him, like, where's this from? This made me feel quite sort of warm inside, to see a street sign named after us. And it turned out that him and his brother, they're doctors, and they'd been to a charity event where they'd donated money towards a charity. And one of the things you got to do was to name a street in Houston for a year. So that's what they did. And then they kept the street sign. So when I left Tamasha, I sort of felt like, you know what, it sort of was a symbolic thing of me saying, I occupy this street in the arts, and it's a place that I feel very comfortable. It's a boulevard, it's wide with trees, and, and actually it doesn't matter which doors open, which doors don't. It's not going to be defined by other people and where they allow me to enter. That was a sort of significant thing for me. So that's how it started. And also, my sister, Suman, she and I have worked closely together a lot. And it's a place for us to also, invite associates, to work with arts and non-arts partners, to just sort of make the work that we want to make.
So you're still writing, you're still directing, you're still...
I've never directed. I'm not a director. I've been an artist.
Maybe that's one thing to do.
It's not for me. It's not for me. It's too hard. It's not for me. But
and why did you leave Tamasha? What was obviously everyone moves on, but was there any Was it something that artistically, something else that you wanted to do, or?
I mean, I think the thing is, like, Christine and I, funnily enough, we always used to say, Tamasha is the two of us. So the first decade, we were very much like, this is about our friendship. If one of us decides not to do it, we don't need to, we'll just keep it light, sort of thing. And then it became this bigger and bigger thing, and then we absolutely started saying, actually, Tamasha is, it's bigger than the sum of us, So at some point, you will say, okay, I'm going to leave, because that's what, you're not going to just sit there till you drop and then the company folds around you. So it started to be articulated, and then Christine got a job. She left before me. So she got a job, I think it was in 2013, teaching in Australia. And I was sort of faced with this moment of what next kind of thing,
Yeah.
And kind of that's where it stemmed from. But it's very hard to understand exactly. Now I'm looking back on it, events. And also there is an obsession of, there's an obsession of make way for younger people. And all of those things came at once,
Yeah. And were you adamant that when you were going to leave, that you wanted to have some kind of control or say in your successor, in how the company was going to continue?
No, I have no connection in that sense, or influence, or no, that wasn't a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going back.
I mean, it would be nice to, we remain connected in terms of as peers and supporting each other's work, but it's not a kind of formal connection as such.
Yeah, and just going back to what Tad was saying about, where do you think British Asian theatre is heading? If we ask another question before that, what do you consider British Asian theatre? Because there's so many responses that we get when we ask this question as to exactly what is British Asian theatre. So what would you consider that, and where do you think it's heading?
I mean, I think it is. I mean, it's, obviously we sort of took great pride in calling ourselves British Asian, our generation. And because it was a way of unifying us, there wasn't a kind of, you're a Hindu, you're a Muslim, you're from Bangladesh, I feel now there is much more, people are defining themselves much more in narrower identities.
Yeah.
I don't know where that comes from. Maybe there's that people feel a personal need to do that. I still, feel that the unifying aspect of who we are is more important. So I guess it is theatre that people from our backyard want to make, and it can be anything. I think you have to, being uniquely subjective and sort of making work that resonates with you first is what's really important, So I don't sort of see it as a movement in terms of a genre, It's the right to make the work that you want to make. And I hope work that is in conversation with and informed by work that's come before as well,
Yeah.
Not limited by or not dictated by, but not in ignorance of work that's come before. That's what I hope, because, we all read classic plays and plays. And I just think because a lot of our work also hasn't been published,
Yeah.
So there's a sort of lack of, there's a sort of erasure that happens each time. And then I don't like an obsession that young people have of sort of feeling as though they are the first to do something, when they almost inevitably aren't,
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that actually we've uncovered as we've been researching various different articles on Offstage, realizing actually that there's a lot of work that so many artists of our generation are now completely ignorant of. And there is, and then it's all further hyped by the media that, this is the first play to do this, or the first, and actually there's a lot of, if you look deep into it, it's never usually true. But just like you said, there's an erasure, there's no archival central system, there isn't really been much joined up preservation.
I mean, it's like, my sister Suman, curated in 2018 a series of readings called Retracing Our Footsteps at the Royal Court. They had a sort of empty week that we took over, like the main stage of the Royal Court, and we read 3 plays. And one of them was 50, 60 years old, and it was Pratap Sharma's A Touch of Brightness, which had been at the Royal Court over 50 years ago, you know. And people don't know about these. And, you know, his daughter and wife flew over from Bombay, and it was such an emotional moment for them because people don't remember those pieces. You know, and they were really landmark at the time because they were banned. It was banned in India. And then, you know, Harwant Baines' play Blood, Anif Qureshi's play Borderline. And actually the young actors who were in it, they were like, oh, I didn't even, you know, it made them start looking at the Southall riots in the 80s. And so the plays became a sort of catalyst for artists wanting to look back on history, you know.
Well, they're essentially now some of those plays that were written in those times. They are the locus of that history, that generation, that at the time in which they were written.
I think intergenerational work is brilliant. It's like, you know, it's like me, not, you know, I'm so bad digitally and all that, so I can't work. You know, when I did Touchstone Tales, all the young people that supported me, I mean, that was fantastic. So it's not a kind of moral in that sense. I think we should all work across the generations.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Sudha, for your time and your experiences, and, you know, letting us into some of those moments in your career and your life that have shaped undoubtedly, you know, British theatre in this country. And we hope to, when the lockdown ends, come and see some of your work and meet you personally as well. But thank you so much for your time.
No, it's an absolute pleasure.